The wine glass slipped out of the old man's hand and exploded against the marble floor of the country club, and for one full second, the entire private dining room went silent. Not polite dinner quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that drops over a room when something cracks open that was never supposed to be touched. A heartbeat earlier, Gerald Whitmore had been laughing so hard at his own joke that he'd had to set his fork down. He was a big man, expensive suit, the kind of laugh that fills a room because it's used to being allowed to. So, he'd boomed, loud enough for both tables to hear. "What exactly did you do all those years, Margaret? Besides keep house?" I'd set down my water and answered him quietly. One word. Lazarus, that was it. But the silver-haired man standing by the door in the club's burgundy security blazer, the one nobody had paid any attention to all evening, went white as paper and let his glass fall. It shattered between his feet. He didn't even look down. He was staring at me like a man staring at a photograph of someone he'd buried. "My God," he whispered. "It's really you." Then he straightened his back as well as his bad knee would let him, and right there in front of my daughter, in front of the Whitmores, in front of 2 tables of strangers, in their Sunday best, the old airman raised his hand to his forehead and held a salute. That was the moment Gerald Whitmore realized he had made a terrible mistake. The dinner was supposed to be easy, just one evening. My daughter Emily had gotten engaged in the spring, and the Whitmores had insisted on hosting a joining of the family's dinner at their country club outside Charleston. White tablecloths, a private room. A string quartet you could barely hear over the air conditioning. Honestly, I almost didn't go. At 58, I'd learned something most people don't figure out until they've buried enough of the people they love. Peace is worth more than being seen. I'd spent 20 years getting very good at being small. It's harder than it sounds. But Emily had taken my hands in our kitchen the week before. "Mom," she'd said, "please, just be yourself. They'll love you." She didn't know that myself was exactly the thing I'd spent 2 decades hiding. So I bought a navy dress, I had my hair done, and I drove the hour and a half to Charleston promising myself I'd smile through whatever the evening turned into. I should have known what kind of family I was walking into the moment I saw the seating cards. Gerald Whitmore had built a fortune in defense contracting, the kind of man who'd never served a day but had made millions off the people who did. He talked about the military the way some men talk about a sports team they've never played for. His wife Diane wore her pearls like armor and looked at my off-the-rack dress the way you'd look at a stain. And their son Tyler, Emily's fiancé, was a decent enough kid who'd clearly spent his whole life learning to laugh at his father's jokes a half second before everyone else did. I'd raised Emily alone since she was 9. Her father couldn't stay. I'll get to that, but she'd grown into someone soft and brave and good, and watching her glow that night across the table was worth every uncomfortable minute I knew was coming. It came faster than I expected. It started with the seating. The Whitmores had put Emily and Tyler at the head of the table with Gerald and Diane. And they'd put me down at the far end, beside the children, Tyler's nieces and nephews, sweet kids coloring on the backs of their menus. A small thing. A deliberate thing. Diane caught my eye when I found my card and gave me a thin little smile, the kind that's meant to be seen. I sat down with the children. One of them, a girl of about 7, offered me a green crayon. I took it. We drew a fairly respectable horse together. It was, I'll admit, the best part of the evening up to that point. Then Gerald started in. He did it the way insecure, powerful men always do, wrapped in a compliment so he could pretend it was kindness. "Emily tells us you raised her all on your own," he said over the appetizers, turning the whole table toward me.
"Remarkable. A single mother. And you never remarried? Never went back to work?" "I worked," I said simply. "Oh? Doing what?" "This and that." "It was a long time ago." Diane tilted her head. "It's just, Tyler said you live out near the lake. In that little house."
We worried Emily might have had a difficult upbringing. She said difficult the way you'd hold something with 2 fingers. "We did fine," I said. And we had. Emily never went without a meal or a warm coat or a single school play. I'd made sure of that. What she went without was a mother who'd tell her where her father went and why I woke up some nights with my own screaming in my ears. Gerald wasn't finished. He'd had 3 glasses of a wine that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and he was enjoying himself now. "You know what I always say," he announced to the table. "There's nothing wrong with an honest, simple life. Some people are built for great things." He spread his hands, taking in the marble, the quartet, himself, and some people are built to keep the home fires burning. No shame in it. A few of the Whitmore relatives chuckled. Emily's face had gone tight. She started to say something, and I touched her wrist under the table. "Let it go. It's one night." I'd spent 20 years swallowing worse than Gerald Whitmore. I could swallow this, but Gerald, like every man who's never been told no, mistook my silence for an invitation. "So come on, Margaret," he said, leaning back with his glass. "Settle it for us. What did you actually do all those years? Besides keep house?" And I don't know what it was. Maybe the wine he'd had, maybe the seating card, maybe 20 years of being the quiet one, the strange one, the woman who never explained herself. Maybe I was just tired. Tired in the way you only get when you've spent half your life making yourself smaller so other people could feel bigger. So I set down my water glass, and I told the truth. "I pulled people out of fire for a living," I said, "mostly out of the ocean, sometimes off of mountains. Whatever was burning." The table laughed. Of course it did. Gerald laughed loudest. "Oh, so? A nurse?" He smirked. "An EMT? No, then what would they have called you?" he said, still grinning, still playing to his audience. "What was your little nickname?" I looked him directly in the eye. "Lazarus." That's when the wine glass hit the floor by the door. The man in the burgundy blazer hadn't been part of the dinner at all. He was the club's evening security supervisor, an old man with a cane and a limp, the kind of fixture you stop noticing in a place like that. I'd clocked him when I walked in. Combat veterans recognize each other the way 2 cats recognize each other across a yard. Something in the posture. Something in the eyes. But I'd looked away, the way I always do. Now he was crossing the room toward me, dragging his bad leg, and his face had come apart completely. "Lazarus," he said again, and his voice broke on it. Pedro 4-1, Helmand, November. I didn't answer. My throat had closed. "You came back for us," he said. "Everybody said you wouldn't. The weather, they called it off. Command called it off." His old hands were shaking. "You came back anyway." The whole room was staring now. Gerald's grin had frozen on his face like a man who'd started a sentence and forgotten the end of it. "Sir," Emily said carefully, half rising, do you know my mother?" The old airman wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and he didn't answer her. Instead, he came to attention as straight as his body would allow, and he saluted me. "Held it." "Master Sergeant Whit Calloway," he said. "Pararescue. You carried me to that bird with your own arms, ma'am. I've waited 30 years to thank you." And for the first time all night, Gerald Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The string quartet had stopped between songs, and nobody had told them to start again. The children at my end of the table had gone still, sensing the weight in the air the way children do. I stood slowly and took the old man's hand in both of mine. "At ease, Whit," I said quietly. "Sit down before that knee gives out." He let out a wet laugh and gripped my hand hard. Diane found her voice first. "I'm sorry," she said, with a brittle little smile. "There must be some confusion. Margaret is Emily's mother. She gestured vaguely. "A homemaker." Whit Calloway turned and looked at her, and something in his face made her go quiet. "Ma'am," he said, "do you know what a pararescueman does?" Diane blinked. "We're the ones they send when somebody's already as good as dead." Whit said, "Behind the lines, in the water, in the fire. Our whole motto is that others may live." He looked back at me, and his eyes filled again. "And in my whole career, there was exactly one pilot the PJs trusted to fly into anything to get us out. 1. He pointed at me, his hand trembling. You called her a homemaker. I called her the reason my kids have a father. The room was utterly silent. Emily was staring at me. Mom, she whispered, what is he talking about? I sat back down slowly. At my age, your body decides these things for you. I looked at my daughter's face, the face I'd kissed goodnight 10,000 times, the face I'd never once told the truth to, and I realized the running was over. I flew rescue helicopters, I said. Combat search and rescue. Air Force. For 16 years, I folded my hands on the white tablecloth. When a pilot got shot down, or a team got pinned down somewhere they shouldn't have been, or a man went into the ocean, they sent people like me to go get them. And they sent men like Whit to go down on the cable and bring them up. Gerald had recovered enough to scoff, weakly. Come on. Helicopters? You're telling me you flew combat helicopters? Whit answered before I could, and his voice had gone hard. Sir, she flew a pavehawk into a sandstorm the rest of the formation turned back from. She flew it through small arms fire that put 11 holes in the fuselage. She set it down on a ridge nobody thought was survivable, in the dark, with her co-pilot bleeding out beside her, and she held it there long enough for us to load 6 wounded men. He paused. I was the 4th man on. I remember her hands on the controls. I remember thinking they were the steadiest hands I'd ever seen. Why Lazarus? Tyler asked quietly. He'd stopped laughing at his father's jokes for the first time all night. Whit smiled faintly, because the men she brought back were supposed to be dead. Every single one of us. He looked at me. She raised the dead. So that's what we called her. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'd hated that name for 30 years. It had felt like a crown that didn't fit, handed to a woman who knew exactly how many people she hadn't been able to reach. It wasn't bravery, I said softly. People always call it bravery. It was just, they were still alive. And I had a helicopter. That's the whole math of it. No, ma'am, Whit said. Bravery is doing it when you're afraid. And I saw your face that night. You were afraid. You came anyway. Emily reached over and took my hand. Her eyes were wet. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? How do you answer that? The honest answer was that the part I couldn't tell her wasn't the heroism. It was what came after. The heroism was easy to bury. It was the rest of it that had buried me. Because the story doesn't end the way Whit thinks it does, I said. Whit's face changed. The pride drained out of it, replaced by something older and more careful. He'd been a sergeant long enough to know when a pilot was about to tell him something he didn't want to hear. After Helmand, I said, they took my wings. The table went still again, but a different kind of still. They what? Emily said. I turned my water glass slowly on the tablecloth, watching the light move in it. The mission that night was never supposed to happen. A reconnaissance team got dropped in the wrong valley, a planning failure, somebody's bad coordinates. When they got ambushed, the officer who'd signed off on that drop had a choice. He could authorize a rescue and put the failure on the record. Or he could call it off and let the storm take the blame and the team with it. He called it off, Whit said, very quietly. He already knew this part. 30 years and he'd never said it out loud. He called it off, I agreed. Weather, he said, too dangerous. Wait for morning. I looked up. There wasn't going to be a morning for those men. Whit knows. They were already taking casualties. So you went without orders, Tyler said. I went against orders, I corrected him. There's a difference, in the eyes of the people who write the reports. I told them the rest plainly, because by then there was no point in softening it. How I'd pulled the team out. How my co-pilot, a 26-year-old named Danny Reyes, had taken a round through the shoulder on the way in and kept calling out my instruments for me anyway. Until he passed out from the blood loss. How we'd lifted off so heavy and so blind that I still don't fully understand how the aircraft flew. How I'd set it down at the forward base with the fuel gauge reading numbers that should have meant we were already on the ground, one way or another. And how, when the after-action review came, the officer who'd called off the rescue needed the story to be about a reckless pilot who disobeyed a lawful order and endangered a multi-million-dollar aircraft and the lives of her crew. Not about a commander who'd been willing to let 6 men die to keep his record clean. His name was Colonel Raymond Vance, I said. He had a lot of friends. He made sure I'd never fly for the Air Force again. They grounded you? Emily breathed. After you saved 6 people? 11, by the end, Whit said. Counting 2 missions before that one. They grounded me, I said. A medical discharge, dressed up nice, operational stress. No court-martial, that would have meant testimony. And testimony meant the truth might come out. Easier to quietly decide I was unstable and send me home. I gave a small shrug. And the thing about being told you're unstable by people in uniforms covered in medals? After a while, you start to wonder if they're right. The room was silent. Even Gerald had nothing. That's when your father left, I said to Emily, and her hand tightened in mine. I wasn't sleeping. Couldn't be around crowds. Every helicopter over the highway put my heart through the roof. He said the war had taken more of me than he'd ever gotten. He wasn't wrong. He just left when I needed him to stay. I smiled at her, tired, but he left me you. So I came out ahead. Emily was crying now, quietly, the way I'd taught her without ever meaning to. It was Whit who broke the silence, and when he spoke, his voice had an edge in it I recognized, the old anger of a man who'd carried something too long. Ma'am, he said, there's something you should know. About Vance. I looked at him. He's a member here, Whit said, of this club. Retired 4 years ago, made a fortune consulting. His jaw worked. He's at the bar right now. I checked him in myself an hour ago. I felt the floor tilt under me, the way it does when the past reaches across 30 years and puts its hand on your shoulder. Colonel Raymond Vance. The man who'd taken my wings, my marriage, my name. The man I'd spent 3 decades trying to forget was sitting 50 feet away ordering a scotch. And Gerald Whitmore, finally finding his voice again, said the most Gerald Whitmore thing possible. Vance? Ray Vance? He's a dear friend. Wonderful man. We golfed together. He looked between us, baffled. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. I stood up. There's no misunderstanding, Gerald, I said. But you're right about one thing. We should clear the air. I didn't go to the bar to make a scene. I want to be clear about that, because at 58 you don't have much appetite left for scenes. I'd spent 30 years imagining what I'd say to Raymond Vance, and somewhere in those 30 years the speeches had all worn away. What was left wasn't a speech. It was just a tiredness, and underneath it, very quietly, a question. Whit insisted on coming. He left his cane at the table and walked beside me on pure stubbornness. Emily came too, and Tyler, and even Gerald, trailing along confused and a little frightened in the way of men who've never once been on the wrong side of a room. Vance was at the end of the bar. Older now, of course, we both were. The hair was white and the face had loosened, but the bearing was the same. He still sat like a man who expected the room to arrange itself around him. He glanced over as we approached, the polite half-smile of a club member ready to be flattered. Then, his eyes found my face, and I watched 30 years fall away from him in a single second. He knew me. Instantly, before I said a word. The smile died. Colonel Vance, I said. He set his glass down carefully. It's general, actually, he said. And I'm afraid I don't. Yes, you do, I said. Hellman, November, Pedro 4-1. You called off the rescue. I went anyway. And when I got them out, you took my wings to protect your career. I said it without heat. I'd run out of heat for it years ago. You remember me, Ray. You've remembered me every day. Same as I've remembered you. That's the thing about lying. It takes both of us to keep it buried. The bar had gone quiet around us. Whit stood at my shoulder like a man 30 years younger. Vance's composure was extraordinary. I'll give him that. He looked at Gerald, found a friendly face, and reached for it. Gerald, I'm so sorry. I don't know this woman, but she appears to be unwell. Perhaps she flew the rescue, Whit said. I was on the bird, sir. I'm one of the men you left to die. Vance's eyes flicked to him, and something cold and calculating moved behind them. Sergeant, he said, memory is a funny thing after 30 years. The records are very clear. Lieutenant Coyle disobeyed a direct order and endangered her crew. It's all documented. I'm sorry if she's told you the records you wrote, I said. The official records, he said smoothly. Reviewed by a board. Are you suggesting an entire review board was wrong, and you alone were right? And there it was. The same move. 30 years, and he hadn't changed his footwork once. Wrap the lie in the authority of the institution. Make the truth-teller sound like the crazy one. It had worked on a 28-year-old lieutenant with shaking hands. He clearly thought it would work on a 58-year-old woman in an off-the-rack dress. What he didn't know was who was in the room. Because Whit Calloway had spent 30 years working club doors and VFW halls and reunion dinners, and he turned to the crowd that had gathered at the edge of the bar and he raised his voice. Is there anybody here? He called out. Who served? Anybody who knows the name Lazarus? For a moment, nothing. Then a man at a corner table set down his napkin and stood. 60s, maybe. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over, looked at my face for a long moment, and then turned to Vance. My nephew was on the recon team in that valley, he said. Specialist Aaron Dell. He's a high school football coach now. 3 kids. He looked at me. He told us the story every Thanksgiving. About the pilot who came when nobody else would. We didn't know your name. We prayed for you anyway, every year, for 30 years. His voice cracked. Ma'am. He saluted me. He wasn't even in uniform. It didn't matter. Then a younger man near the window stood. My father was the door gunner that night, he said. He passed in 2019. He had your call sign tattooed on his forearm. He said it meant the dead come back. He swallowed. I never knew it was a real person. Another stood. A woman this time, around my age. I was a flight nurse at the Forward Hospital, she said quietly. I received your patients, all 6. I never forgot that night. I never forgot how you wouldn't leave until you knew each one was breathing. She looked at Vance, and her face hardened. And I remember the officer who came through afterward making sure everyone understood the correct version of events. One by one, they stood, a room full of strangers in a country club outside Charleston, and the truth I'd carried alone for 30 years rose up out of all of them at once, like water finding its level. Vance's face had gone gray. The Helmand mission records were declassified 4 years ago, the flight nurse said. When you retired, General, a lot of us read them. The truth's been sitting in a public archive this whole time. She turned to me. We didn't know how to find you. You disappeared. I meant to, I said. Whit stepped forward then, and he looked Raymond Vance in the eye, and he said the only thing left to say. You let 6 men die to save your career, he said. She traded her whole life to save us. And you have spent 30 years letting people call her unstable so you could keep golfing. His voice was very steady. There's no review board for that, sir, but there's a room full of people who know now. And we're going to remember it just as long as we remembered her. Vance looked around the bar at all of those faces. There was no friendly one left, not even Gerald's. He opened his mouth, and for the first time, nothing came out. He set down his scotch, and he left. He didn't say a word. He just gathered what was left of himself and walked out into the Charleston night, and I watched him go, and I waited to feel the thing I'd waited 30 years to feel. It didn't come. I'd always imagined that moment would feel like winning, like a weight lifting, but standing there watching him disappear through the door, I mostly just felt tired and a little sad and surprised at myself for the sadness. Because the truth is, hating Raymond Vance had been a kind of company. He'd been with me every night for 30 years. And now he was just an old man walking to his car, and I was going to have to figure out who I was without the weight of him. That's the part nobody tells you about justice. It doesn't fill the hole, it just stops you digging it deeper. The room didn't quite know what to do with itself after he left. The quartet, bless them, started playing again, too cheerful for the moment. But it broke the spell. People drifted back toward their tables, but they kept glancing at me, the way you look at something you've decided to remember. Emily put her arms around me and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 30 years of unasked questions had been answered in 20 minutes, and she was holding all of them at once. Over her shoulder, I saw Tyler standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at his father. And Gerald Whitmore had finally run out of room. He came over, and the bluster was gone, and what was left was just an awkward, embarrassed man who discovered the floor he'd been stamping on was actually a trapdoor. "Margaret," he said. I owe you an apology." I had no idea. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." He winced. "I sat you with the children." "You did. I feel like a damned fool." I looked at him for a moment. It would have been easy to twist the knife. He'd earned it. But I was 58 years old, and I'd just watched the man I'd hated longest walk out of my life for good, and I found I didn't have the appetite for cruelty either. "Gerald," I said, the children were the best company in the room. We drew a horse. I picked up the menu the little girl had decorated and showed him. I'd say I got the better table. He laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of him. And something in him settled. "Tyler's lucky," he said quietly, "to be marrying into your family." "He's a good kid," I said. "He laughs at your jokes about half a second too early. He'll grow out of that once he stops being scared of you." I said it gently, but I said it. Gerald Whitmore had been talked to honestly maybe twice in his life, and I figured one more wouldn't hurt him. He took it better than I expected. Money makes some men soft in the wrong places. But it hadn't gotten all the way through Gerald. There was a person still in there, somewhere under the wine and the watch. Whit found me by the door as people were leaving. He'd retrieved his cane. He looked 20 years younger than he had at the start of the evening, and 20 years older all at once, the way you do when you finally set down something you've carried a long time. "I tried to find you, you know," he said, "after I got out. Wanted to thank you properly. Nobody would tell me where you'd gone. I made sure of that," I said. "Why?" he asked. Not accusing, just wanting to understand. I thought about how to answer because every time someone thanked me, I said slowly, I thought about the ones I didn't reach. There were nights I didn't make it in time. Whit, the men I brought back, they remind everyone of the ones I couldn't, including me. I shrugged. It was easier to be a homemaker out by the lake. Quieter, the dead don't visit a homemaker. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 6 men have grandkids because of you. Some math you only count the losses on. You ought to try counting the other column once in a while. I didn't have an answer for that, so I just squeezed his arm, and he covered my hand with his, and 2 old people stood in the doorway of a country club for a moment, carrying the same 30-year-old night between them. Finally setting it down. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at the house by the lake. It was from the flight nurse. Her name was Carol, it turned out, and she'd kept in touch with half the rescue community in the 30 years since. She'd organized something. Inside were letters, dozens of them. From the men I'd pulled out, and from the families of the ones who weren't. From Aaron Dell, the football coach, with a photo of his 3 kids. From the door gunner's son. From a man who'd been 19 years old on that ridge and was 60 now, who wrote that he'd named his daughter after the call sign before he even knew it belonged to a real woman. "We called her Laz," he wrote. "She's 28 now. She's a paramedic. She pulls people out of fire too. I think you'd like her." I read every one of them at the kitchen table, twice, and then I sat for a long time and let myself count the other column, the way Whit had said. It took longer than I expected. The numbers were bigger than I'd let myself believe. I thought that was the end of Raymond Vance. It wasn't quite 11 days after the dinner the phone rang at the lake house. A number I didn't know. I almost let it go. Curiosity won. Margaret, the voice was older than it had been at the bar, somehow, in just 11 days. It's Ray Vance. Please don't hang up. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence is the only thing men like him can't argue with. I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee, he said. I won't blame you if you say no. I have no right to ask. But I'm asking. Every instinct I had said no. But there was another part of me, the tired part, the part that wanted the story finished properly instead of just abandoned in a country club bar, that wanted to look at him one more time. On level ground. So, we met. A diner off the interstate halfway between us, the kind with vinyl booths and a coffee pot that never stops moving. Neutral ground. No club, no friends, no medals on the wall. He looked terrible. Without the bearing and the burgundy carpet around him, Raymond Vance was just an old man with shaking hands, and I realized with a strange jolt that he'd been afraid of this conversation for 30 years exactly as much as I had. He didn't touch his coffee. For a long time he didn't say anything at all. Then, I've read it. The declassified file. Cover to cover. He swallowed. It's all in there. What I did. What you did. I read my own name and I didn't recognize the man it described. Except that I did. I recognized him completely. I waited. I was afraid. He said finally. The word seemed to cost him something. The storm hit. The coordinates were wrong. My coordinates, my plan, and I panicked. I told myself calling it off was the responsible call. The weather. Risk to the aircraft. I had a whole language for it. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. But the truth is, I was a 34-year-old officer who'd just gotten 6 men ambushed in the wrong valley, and I could not face what it would mean if I authorized a rescue and it failed. So I let the storm be the villain. And when you went anyway and succeeded, his voice cracked, you became the only proof that it could have been done. That I'd left them to die for nothing but my own fear. So you had to make me the reckless one, I said quietly. I had to make you wrong, he said. Because if you were right, I was a coward. And I could not be a coward. Not me. Not the man I'd decided to be. He pressed his trembling hands flat on the table. Do you want to know the worst part? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I hated you, he said, for 30 years. Not because you'd done anything to me. Because every time I heard your name, every time some sergeant told that story at a reunion, I had to remember exactly who I really was. He let out a breath. It's a terrible thing, to hate someone for being braver than you. The diner hummed around us. 2 waitresses laughed by the register. An old couple shared a slice of pie 3 booths down. Ordinary American life, going on the way it always does, indifferent to the 2 damaged people in the corner booth finally telling the truth. After everything I did, Vance said hoarsely, "Why didn't you destroy me? The file's been public for 4 years. One phone call to the right reporter, and I'd have spent my retirement as a punchline. Why didn't you?" I turned my coffee cup slowly on the table and thought about it honestly. Because he'd earned an honest answer, the same way the young man at the VFW would. Because hatred is heavy, Ray, I said. You carry it long enough, eventually it starts carrying you. I know. I carried you for 30 years. I met his eyes. I didn't destroy you because I finally got tired of holding you. That's all. It was never mercy. It was just me setting down something that was breaking my back. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I'll give him that. He was at least enough of a man not to ask for the one thing he had no right to. We sat a while longer, 2 old people with different kinds of regret, and then I paid for my own coffee because I would not let him pay for it, and I left him sitting in the booth. I never saw him again. I didn't need to. The story was finished now, properly, and I could finally close the book instead of just losing my place in it. Carol had included one more thing. A flyer. There was a small gathering every fall, she wrote. Rescue crews, PJs, the people they'd carried, the families. Nothing official, just folding chairs and bad coffee and people who understood each other without having to explain. You should come this year, she'd written at the bottom. You don't have to talk, you just have to let us look at you. We've been wanting to for 30 years. I almost didn't go. Old habits. But I went. It was in a VFW hall outside Savannah, exactly as unglamorous as she'd promised. Folding chairs, a coffee urn, a banner somebody had clearly made themselves. And when I walked in, a room full of strangers turned and looked at me, and the looking didn't feel like exposure the way it always had. It felt like being found. Whit was there. He'd driven down, he introduced me around. Simply, "This is Margaret." No medals, no call sign, no speeches. And I was grateful to him for it the way I'd been grateful to him for the salute. For entirely opposite reasons. There was a young man there, late 20s, just back from a deployment, sitting against the wall the way I used to sit. Staring at the floor. I knew that posture. I'd worn it. Trauma has a sound, and sometimes the sound is nothing at all. Carol asked, near the end, if I'd say something. I almost said no. Then I looked at the young man against the wall, and I changed my mind. People think the hard part is the war, I said. The room went quiet. It isn't. The hard part is coming home and not knowing how to be a person again. The hard part is everyone wanting you to be either a hero or a tragedy, when all you feel like is a stranger in your own kitchen. A few people nodded, the kind of nod that comes from the spine, not the head. I spent 30 years thinking that staying alone was the same thing as staying strong. It isn't. It's just a quieter way of still being at war. The young man against the wall had looked up. Somebody told me recently that I'd been counting the wrong column, I said. Only counting the ones I lost, never the ones who got to grow old. I found Whit's face in the crowd. He was right. So I'd say to anybody in here still keeping that ledger, turn the page over. Look at the other side. It's bigger than you let yourself believe. After, the young man came up to me. He didn't say much. They never do at first. He just asked, quietly, does it stop? He gestured vaguely at his own chest. The thing. I thought about lying to him, the comfortable kind. Then, I gave him the truth, because he'd earned it the same way I had. Not all the way, I said. But enough. Enough to live, enough to draw a horse with a 7-year-old and mean it. He didn't understand that last part, but he'd remember it someday, and on that day it would make sense. Find the people who knew you over there, I told him. They're the only ones who'll let you set it down. I waited 30 years to learn that. Don't wait that long. He nodded. His eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them, and I was proud of him for that. Emily got married that October, in a garden, not a country club. Gerald paid for it and didn't say a word about where anyone sat. I sat in the front row. Whit came as my guest. He'd become a fixture by then, the closest thing to family the Air Force had ever given me. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, I stood up, and my voice didn't shake. And I said, her mother does. It was the first time in 30 years I'd stood up in a room full of strangers as exactly who I was. I drove home to the lake that night with the windows down. The air was warm and smelled of pine and river water. And for the first time in a very long time, the quiet in the truck didn't feel empty. It felt earned. People hear a story like mine and they think it's about the rescue. The helicopter, the storm, the salute. But it isn't, really. It's about all the years after. The years I spent letting one coward's lie become the story I told about myself. I let Raymond Vance decide who I was for 30 years, and the joke of it is, he wasn't even thinking about me. He was getting his scotch. The prison was one I'd built, and I'd been the only one inside it. Maybe you know something about that. Maybe there's a version of yourself you put away a long time ago because someone told you it was too much, or not enough, or unstable, or just inconvenient to who they needed you to be. Maybe you've been counting only the column with the losses in it. If you have, I hope you'll do what it took me 30 years to do. Turn the page over. Stand up in the room as exactly who you are. You might be surprised how many people have been waiting to salute you. And if this story reminded you of someone who served, someone who came home quiet, someone who's been carrying something alone for too long, then share it with them. Tell them somebody made it back. Tell them the dead can come home, because that's what the name meant. Everyone always thought Lazarus was about death. It never was. It was about coming back.